small business here. We do government relations, public relations work, analytical research. We've been working in this country for a long time, so I've seen a lot of changes, and so yeah, I have a better perspective than the average bear.
And for people that don't know what the Atlantic Council is, can you kind of tell them?
Sure, the Atlantic Council is the oldest American foreign policy think tank, and it was set up after the creation of NATO to promote transatlantic ties between Europe and North America. So, yeah.
And you guys don't just work in Ukraine. I mean, you're...
Sure, we work around around the globe, but we do have a very significant Ukraine program. We started that kind of with an emphasis in 2014 when the Russians first invaded, and we've continued it since.
The country's kind of divided on aid to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. You've got one side that says we need to keep supporting Ukraine. This is bigger than just Russia invading a non-NATO member. This could turn into something bigger. Mm-hmm. And you've got another side that's saying, well, Ukraine's not a part of NATO, one. Two, we have tons of homeless people in California that are struggling. Our border, there's a crisis going on at the border. The list goes on and on.
All those are valid concerns, and I'm an American citizen, and those issues concern me as well. I'm an American voter for that matter. But you know, these are not binary choices. It's not a choice of let's fix the border or let's help Ukraine. The fact is, we're the United States of America. We put a man on the moon. So we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can fix the problems on the border, and we can support our allies, around the globe. You know, people sometimes say, well, yeah, but we're spending a lot of money. We could be spending it here in the States. And I understand that. We as a country spend too much money. At the same time, though, we have to protect our national security interest. During the Cold War, it was estimated that the U.S. spent $15 trillion to essentially win the Cold War. And that's a lot of money. At the same time, was it worth it? I would say absolutely. If you look at what we spent on Ukraine so far, we're talking $100 billion or less. And we have the added benefit of being able to beat Russia for just, pennies on what it cost us to win the Cold War. So I think it's a great investment. There's not a single American life being put at stake here. We're defending a democracy that is up against an evil empire, right? There's a reason why Ronald Reagan called Russia an evil empire, and that unfortunately has not changed today. So countries that invade their neighbors in this day and age, we cannot reward that by saying, okay, here, take some of their land. Someone robs your neighbor, you're not going to tell the robber, oh, it's okay, just take half their possessions and then everything will be fine, right? We can't do the same in our foreign policy.
You're a foreign policy guy. Can you also talk about something that we've heard from a lot of people here is that if the U.S. didn't do anything in Ukraine, then this opens the door for not only Russia to maybe go and other places, maybe some places in the Baltics, but this also sends a signal to maybe other foreign adversaries such as China to say, well, hey, the United States didn't do anything about Ukraine. Let's go for Taiwan. Let's maybe start expanding our footprint in the South China Sea. Can you kind of talk about it? Do you agree with that kind of sentiment? Do you not?
No, I absolutely think it gives a green light. And while, I think President Biden's position on Ukraine has been good. At the same time, I think President Biden's performance on Afghanistan was horrible. It was disastrous. And I think that set the stage for Russia saying, okay, Biden's too old, too tired, America's weak. Let's move now on Ukraine.
So you believe that Putin watched Afghanistan and said, this is it?
Right. Now's the time. Now's my chance. And so he took that chance. Now, fortunately, the United States, national security apparatus and President Biden have rallied up, as well as the Congress, to support Ukraine in its time of need. But everything sends signals. And had we not done that, I think China would have already moved on Taiwan. They are obviously poking around and doing all they can on that front. North Korea may have taken some additional actions. even Iran. And we see what they're doing through their sponsorship of Hezbollah against Israel, for example. You know, if you think about Ukraine, you think about in real simple alliances. You know, on one side you have Ukraine, United States, and United Kingdom. On the other side you have Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I mean, it's a pretty simple comparison of which side do you want to be on, which team do you want to play for, right? In 1994, in December 94, the United States, United Kingdom, and Russia all made an agreement called the Budapest Memorandum with Ukraine, whereby Ukraine would give up its third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, 3,000 warheads, in exchange for, number one, security guarantees, and then also technical assistance to help, for example, get jobs for the scientists who were involved in that sort of work and all these sorts of things. So there's certainly, you know, aid that came with that to soften the economic impact. Fast forward from the security guarantees that the United States, Great Britain, and Russia said they would give to 2014. Russia annexes Crimea, they invade parts of the east. Obviously Russia at that point, they forgot about their security guarantee and they became an aggressor against Ukraine. The U.S. and United Kingdom at that point did not intervene with military assistance or support. People are not going to take the U.S. guarantees seriously around the globe, whether it's in NATO, whether it's Japan, whether it's Australia, any country you want to name, or even Israel, if American guarantees aren't worth anything. So give us your weapons and then we'll defend you, but we're not going to defend you now because it's Russia and we don't want to necessarily risk a conflict with them.
So when people say we shouldn't be defending Ukraine because they're not a NATO member, a counter argument to that from a Ukrainian could be, well, you guys gave us security guarantees. Did the United States actually give it to them, or was it Russia? Were like all NATO or all these that were brokering it a part of it, or was it just a Russian thing? Like
they were all joint signees on the Budapest Memorandum.
So technically, the United States maybe hasn't lived fully up to what they said they would do.
Correct.
And that's kind of interesting because a lot of people in the U.S., I'm pretty well informed. I read all kinds of Western media. I have to, it's my job. I didn't know this till I got here.
You know, and I think that's why you saw President Clinton, who negotiated the agreement, offer his apology. I mean, those are words, but you know, it is an acknowledgement that what was promised to Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum was not delivered. We're, I think, reconciling some of that now with the military assistance we're giving. But you know, look, there's a lot of non-NATO allies we support. We support Israel. We support Japan. We support Australia. We have major non-NATO ally status with many countries around the world. And even without the major non-NATO ally status, we've also supported different countries. So, you know, the other thing I would just say too is, if you look at, for example, the aid bill that was passed last May.
40 billion?
40 billion.
Yeah.
You know, almost 9 billion of that, or actually a little bit more than 9 billion, went directly to U.S. defense contractors. In other words, to U.S. jobs to produce those weapons, right? So those are American jobs at good wages, American companies that pay American taxes. So, you know, it's not simply a matter of handing over 40 billion to Ukraine. A lot of that was actually reinvestment, frankly, in American jobs in the defense industry. And this is not the first time we faced big challenges. I remember in the 1980s doing nuclear war drills, and they told us to hide under our desk, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, in the 1980s, we were all the time, from the films to everything, we were constantly, you know, beating through our heads, you know, the Russians are coming, nuclear war is imminent, you know, acid rain, you name it. There's never been a shortage of problems. And then when the West won the Cold War, all of a sudden, everyone kind of forgot about those dangers for a while, at least until 9/11, and then people started thinking in terms of, you know, the problems that are out there. Look, China's on the rise. Whether or not China will stay together as a single country, I think, is a challenge that they're facing internally.
Really?
How they, you know, deal with their own separate regions and how they keep control of that many people. under essentially an authoritarian state. I think that those are big challenges that they're facing themselves long term. The United States, okay, anytime you have 300 million people, there's always going to be someone doing bad things. They're going to shoot a school or this or that, and you can't take the evil out of people's hearts in mass, right? You can do it one-on-one, but there's always going to be somebody who wants to do something evil. And anytime you get more than 1 billion people together, there's going to be people who are going to do bad things. It's mathematics, I'm unfortunately. So look, there's always challenges to the order. China is challenging the order. Russia is trying to challenge the order because Russia is a declining power. They're trying to, restore the old empire one more time. Putin wants to be remembered as the guy who helped take back the parts of the Soviet Union and restore the Soviet Empire so that he can be buried in a mausoleum right next to Lenin and be in a glass case.
So you think this is an
years.
ego thing for him?
I think it's a legacy thing for him, and he doesn't like the West. That's fine. A lot of people don't like the West, but I think for him it's a legacy thing, and I think what the real state of his health is not clear. But any man at his age in Russia, he's already outlived the life expectancy of a Russian male. So anybody his age is going to be thinking about the future and what's their legacy going to be, and he wants to go down in history as a great Russian leader who helped retake parts of the empire. I mean, Russia's always been the largest country, right? So it's ironic that they keep saying just a little more land, right? They're already the largest country. How much more land do you need? You look at the Russian Far East, it's sparsely inhabited, but the land that they want is always the European land. First, on the language issue, and using the Mexico analogy, what perhaps might be a better analogy is what if Mexico said we need to defend the rights of Spanish speakers in the United States. They're being discriminated against. They're being treated as second-class citizens. Therefore, we're going to put troops on the border of California, Texas, Arizona, maybe put our Navy off the coast of Florida as well. If that happened, Americans I know would be ready to, reignite the Mexican-American War, right? So language by itself does not give one a territorial claim on another country. People decide their own future. In Ukraine in 2004, during the Orange Revolution, when Ukraine elected their first openly Western leader, they made a civilization choice where they said, look, we're Ukrainians, we're not Russians. Doesn't mean we don't like Russians, but we're Ukrainians. And then they followed up in 2014 with Euromaidan, and those protests, which ousted a pro-Russian leader who fled the country, was later impeached. Ukrainians said, look, we want to go to Europe, right? That was not about NATO in any case. It was just said, look, we want to be part of the European Union. We see our future in Brussels and, not in Bishkek. That we see the future west. We want to be part of those structures. We want to trade with Europe. We find that this rules-based, economic order much more favorable than kind of the law of the jungle and mercantilism and the corruption that goes with trading with Russia. So Ukraine rebelled against this push to go towards Russia in 2014. That resulted in Euromaidan. They made a European civilization choice. And now today, Russia's saying, well, yeah, Ukraine was going to join NATO. The reality is Ukraine was, prior to the war, was far from NATO. Number one, you can't enter NATO if you have a territorial dispute. So until Crimea would have been resolved, NATO is not going to accept Ukraine as a member. That's
interesting. I think a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. And that's wise on NATO's part, right? We're a defensive alliance, so we don't want to be entrapped into, as NATO, going into fight on someone else's behalf, right? They said, resolve your territory issues, and if you're a candidate who meets the requirements, we'll take you in. There was no fast track or no path to NATO on a practical level, right? They can continue to train and bring the military up to NATO standards, which they were doing, but on a practical level, there was no imminent threat of Ukraine joining NATO. Ironically now, though, NATO might be the only answer which resolves the war, because a lot of people in the West are saying we need peace, we need a ceasefire. look, and nobody wants more peace more than the Ukrainians, but the question is, what kind of peace is that going to be? Ukrainians are not willing to accept a peace on their knees, and they're not willing to surrender to have peace at any cost. The war has gone too far. Too many people have died. Too many war crimes and atrocities have been committed against Ukrainians. So, I mean, the question is, let's say they signed a magical ceasefire today. Okay, great. What's going to happen? I can tell you what's going to happen. Russia will work over the next couple of years to get the sanctions lifted. They will restock their military supplies, which are in short supply right now. Russia's down to one major airstrike a month on Ukrainian cities because they don't have enough rockets anymore. They're running out of their own weapons.
Do you think they're also holding some back just in case something else, another conflict was to happen?
Sure.
Do you think Russia's truly taken their gloves off in this war?
Look, I'm not a military expert.
Yeah.
Military, folks could tell you that better. But what is clear is Russia thought this would be a cakewalk. It's obviously not. Right. They are having to use resources they did not think they would have to use to win this war, which one highlights the weaknesses of the Russian army, which is still, prior to this war, at least considered the number 2 army, even ahead of China, right? So if Russia is number 2 and they're not able to make progress after this time, what does it tell you about China? Okay, think about that and what people think of the Chinese threat. It is a threat, but it should be in the proper context. What would a ceasefire look like? Russia's going to simply use it to restock and resupply, and they'll be back in 2 years or 3 years. We're simply postponing the inevitable, which is until Ukraine has a valid security guarantee, not a Budapest memorandum. Hey, we'll protect you. Wink, nudge. Give us your nuclear weapons. And the only security guarantee which can be provided Ukraine is essentially NATO. Now, the actual details will have to be worked out. What Ukraine looks like under NATO versus the 1991 boundaries of Ukraine may be different. That Ukraine's not going to say, okay, join NATO and then we'll go fight for you. It would be simply join NATO with the unoccupied territory of Ukraine as it exists at that point.
If you could tell one thing to Americans that you feel like maybe Western media hasn't got to them, or something that you think maybe hasn't really been, really emphasized about this war in Ukraine, what would you say? This is your chance. You can go anywhere with this.
Look, we as Americans have always stood up against tyranny. We stood up to Hitler in World War II. We stood up to the Germans in World War I. We stood up to the United Kingdom when the United Kingdom was wrong, right? So we've always been on the right side of history. I understand that many people, for example, the Republican Party, which I'm a member of, they are opposed to the war in Ukraine and supporting Ukraine for the simple reason that Biden's for it. And I get that. That's the oldest game in Washington. The president of the party is for it, and I'm from the other party, therefore I'm going to be against it. But I would say that, look, we need to base our positions on principle, and the principle is this is as clear a case as we're going to have in our lifetime of black and white, good versus evil. And if we're not on the right side of history, then that calls into question who we are as a people and who we are as a nation. So the Ukrainian fight is simply a fight for the same values that we as Americans fought for in 1776 and have continued to fight for the last 200 and some plus years.
Our organization has been functioning since 2016. It's called League and Law. We've been fighting with criminals and corruption. Corruption has been functioning on all fronts. They delay payments for Ukrainian military soldiers who are at front line, which means they delayed it for a long time, which means they keep this money that's supposed to be paid on time as a salary to Ukrainian soldiers, and this money are turning over in banks. So that means they use this money and they make commissions.
We have never heard about that.
Because we are not allowed to talk about it. I think that Western countries don't really know about it, because if they knew, then Ukraine would not have support. We have one well-known Ukrainian politician, Arseniy Yatsenyuk. When he was in charge of government, when he was prime minister in Ukraine, he spent money. He spent $3.7 billion on a fence at the border between Ukraine and Russia, and he was claiming that none of the Russians would be able to cross the line because of the fence, metal fence. Now he is sitting in the States and he is saying that I'm gonna kill Russians, I'm gonna do that and that. And now, lately, nobody really asked him where did those $3.7 billion go.
Was there no fence ever built?
Забор построил? Yeah, he did build the fence. But if you pay attention, what kind of fence? It's just a usual metal net fence. So it's very cheap. It's not $3.7 billion.
What he's insinuating is that they say, like for body armor, they say it costs $100 million, or the fence, it costs $3.7 billion. But what they're really doing is they're not spending the full potential of that money that's been allocated. And then are they literally putting it in their pockets, or are they giving themselves their own? You see what I'm saying? Like, is that literally what's going on?
Absolutely. If somebody exposes certain corruption things, or they don't like something, they just come up to the apartment to that person, and they drop something. Like they drop a Russian flag in a room to the person who they didn't like, and they say, "Hey, look, he's a traitor," or they just drop in a room something like a piece of drug or something to accuse this person in doing something bad, just because they don't like this person, just because this person exposed something. Our president Zelensky does everything he can, but a certain people close his eyes in doing something behind his back.
With all his allegations that the Ukrainian government targets people that speak openly about potential corruption in the country, why is he comfortable with sitting in a chair, showing his face, and talking about corruption? Is he afraid that he could be targeted?
I'm not concerned about my security. What I would answer to those people who would assume that he's a Russian spy, or they don't like what he's saying in front of the camera, I would tell them that they'd better check what our organization and me was doing from the very beginning of the war. We were helping refugees from Kherson, from Nikolaev. We were helping Ukrainian soldiers as much as we could. And we were totally involved into charity organization, and we were helping them. That's what I would answer them. As you can see in social media, even National Security Service exposed that a certain aid is coming from the West to Ukraine. They're not reaching the target or people who are in need, and there is a certain corruption in that. In the first days of war, when the war started, there were a lot of donation to Ukrainian military as body armors, equipment for soldiers, donating for war for people who were fighting. And all this stuff that Ukrainian representatives were receiving, body armors and other equipment, they received it for free. But what the representatives did, they were selling to the soldiers all this equipment. You can easily see how representatives of National Security Service, what kind of cars expensive they have, what kind of houses they have, from 1.5 till $3 million. The question is, where did they get this money? And having this opportunity to speak in front of the camera, I would like to send a message to Zelensky, to our president, that he would he would just pay attention to all those corruption things that are really functioning and working inside of the country.
If he could say one thing to Americans watching this,
We're full of respect to Americans. That's our brother nation because they help and support us, and due to that, we're moving ahead.
with him saying all this stuff today, he's not concerned about his safety at all.
He said, "Why should I be concerned about it? Even if something happens with me, there'll be another person who will be fighting against corruption."
Has he ever been threatened?
Of course, a lot of times. And there are a lot of cases when people expose shady corruption things on a social media, and all of those posts, they are just blocked by National Security Service.
So they're being censored.
Yeah, they censor. Huh? And they block it.
And did they give a reason why it's blocked? Would they say why?
They never do it openly. They do it through different accounts, through their other tools. So they never do it openly.
Does he think Zelensky's corrupt? Just flat out.
Зеленский сопричастен с коррупцией? No.
No.
Thank you, bro. Wow. Nice place, bro.
And I slept. Yeah.
You sleep up there?
Yeah.
Nice. You have to go up all the stairs. Do you still use the wheelchair ever? Or?
No, but I not broke, but hurt my left leg, and I cannot use my one prosthetics, and I use wheelchair. So actually, there is office my friends. This walk by scheme.
Where?
He's letting you stay here.
Yeah, not every day, but often.
Because before you were living with the military.
Yeah. And,
so.
I'm from Irina, and.
Do you have a...
But before war, I live in Kiev too, in near home, near apartment.
Yeah.
His name is Alexander Kutko, and his nickname, code name in the military is Terran. Like a Torn.
Dorn. When did he join the military?
From the beginning of war, he was already sort of there, but his battalion became the part of the United military force of Ukraine on June 12th.
Там було Дмитрівка,
There was a village called Mitrivka, and just right before the counteroffensive that liberated most of pretty much all the Kharkiv, this is when it has happened. So they're firing at the enemy and make sure that they won't get through, and they didn't get.
Could he see what he was firing at, or was he just given coordinates?
Ні, координати дрон координував.
The drones. And I wanted to talk to you about the drones. Like, everybody's seen the videos. Are they like military grade drones? Are they using like DJI drones? Like
Мавіки, в основному мавіки.
So you guys have a DJI drone. Who did they have to buy it? Does the Ukrainian government give it?
Волонтери. Ну, тобто це був добровольчий батальйон, і від початку ще з 2014 року, і оброслися контактами з волонтерами хорошими. Тобто показували себе в боях, ну і люди бачили і довіряли, в принципі. Тому
This was the voluntary enlistment, so he's a volunteer.
You're a volunteer.
The volunteer.
ні,
So
ні.
basically, he voluntarily enlisted since 2014 in this voluntary battalion that became a part of the official Ukrainian forces in at the beginning of the war on the 12th of June, as we said. And so basically, he was and the people who saw what they were doing all this time, they built trust in that. And so when they joined the army officially, right, and they became part, those people started to support them even more. So they helped them to the volunteers.
So volunteers got them drones.
Right.
So they relied on
Yes.
donations.
Yes.
Ну, да, от, наприклад,
So what they would do, they literally would take an engine from the mowing machine,
Like a lawnmower.
and they would start the engine, leave it in a position, And the Russians would start shelling that position, and they would just run because, that's how they would deplete the ammunition of the Russians.
Ну, це не знаю, чи момент просто.
He's saying that the Russians are also, some of them are good fighters. They're good professionals. So, for example, they had one specific tank, a Russian tank, that would literally come about 500 meters away from that, which is a little bit less than half a mile, on the open position, would start firing at their position, then maneuver and go to a different place, firing at the position, and they would not be able to catch him. And it's very dangerous what they have done, the Russians, because he could be easily shot. But they were able to maneuver and sort of do their task and then kind of get back. And they were not able actually to shoot that tank.
There's a lot of Western media that say like a lot of these soldiers are being sent in with no training, shitty bulletproof helmets, like
The Russian soldiers.
yeah, the Russian soldiers. Like, is he disputing that?
So there are two types of people. So he definitely sees truth to that, what you said, because he has friends that are on the front line right now, and they see exactly that. That, like bombs literally coming, and they come as a meat. A lot of the criminals, prisoners, they go as a meat. They're being shot, they're being killed. But then there are some also elite forces.
Є випадки, коли знаходять, не те, щоб знаходять, там знешкоджують ворога, заходять.
They come to the position that they shell, that they basically, the Russians are laying that, and some of them have British camo, that they have M16 gun, that they have, all of the equipment and everything, the Russian soldiers.
You're saying that you have found Russian soldiers somehow are purchasing British military clothing, and they're also getting Western weapons.
Ну, так.
Like, he's found them with M16s.
Просто...
Not to mislead anything, because he doesn't know the precise mark of the weapon, but the carbon, like the weapon is Western.
Let's kind of get into his story and like what happened.
24th of August. So basically, it was a day of independence. They woke up very early in the morning. They went to their command center in the village. They actually were putting flags on the buildings for Independence Day. They took all of the needed equipment and food and everything and went back to their position. They took one more mortar gun. It was a different caliber because at that time, they needed the two of them to calibrate the shooting.
в принципі, ми...
On that day, they came into the village, and this was a gray zone. So sometimes Russians would come, sometimes Ukrainians would come, and it was sort of a contested area. So now they actually came and they started to setting the base there. And the Russians knew where the positions are because the Russians would also come. And so that day actually they captured 8 prisoners of war, Russian soldiers, and they took them out. But then, as soon as they took those positions, the Russians started shelling them. So the Russians, because they knew the positions, they were very accurate at shooting at them because they just captured these positions. 13 people got wounded and 1 was killed.
Once you get hit, what happened? Like, does he even remember?
Свідомість не втрачає.
He didn't lose conscience.
You didn't lose consciousness.
He was in the trench,
Ну, а моя команда якраз була...
and they were like as far as that from that table. So they were trying to stop the tank that was shooting at soldiers and couldn't bridge the distance. He went into a trench. It was pretty hot. There was no sound. You didn't hear, the either coming in or coming down. Nothing. There was no whistle. So I didn't feel the pain first couple of seconds, and I just saw how the land started to fall down and kind of close, right, because it exploded.
Ну, і...
I was really lucky because there were doors that we wanted to cover the trench because of the phosphorus bombs the Russian used, and so they burned through, so they wanted to use it as a protection, and they were standing on the side, and they just fell on him, and so protected him. So when the ground collapsed, he actually saw he had some air, and he could see the sky. 2 seconds, and I started feeling cold in my legs because the soil was cold. The soil started to slide. There was like those 2-3 seconds that it was so cold, and it was the worst pain because the soil started getting into the wounds, into the legs.
You scream.
Yeah, so that people would actually hear him. So you wanted them to hear that he's there.
Ну, мене відкопали досить швидко.
So they quickly uncovered.
Наклали турнікети мені на обидві ноги.
Tourniquets in both legs. They give him painkiller, and they also dug out the radio. The evacuation car came very quick. At least that's how I felt it. It's maximum probably 10 minutes, so I think it was very fast. And so they have a front, like a pre-frontline surgery.
Something people never really hear about are these frontline hospitals. Can he describe, if he can even remember it?
Чесно кажучи,
It was all like in the movies. All Russian, Soviet Union kind of style hospital. So when they started bringing him to the surgery, I don't remember seeing other soldiers, but when I came out, I saw other soldiers.
Did he know how bad his legs were? They didn't tell him anything?
Вони
So yeah, basically, it's everything. They start asking your name, your group, but your blood type, the contact information of the parents, sort of basic, and then they cut everything and look at the, your clothes and everything, and then they shoot the anesthesia and then just wake up.
That's when he realized that he'd lost his legs.
So no, I understood that when it hit him, that the explosion happened. This type of pain doesn't happen when you just cut yourself. When I was going in the vehicle, when they were transferring me, I was able to actually finally take a look a little bit because I was laying on my belly, and then they turned me around and I was able to look, and I saw that my left leg was completely smashed and everything. And then my right leg again was, completely, parts of it. And then I saw my shoes just crossing. So I knew that.
What goes through your mind at that point?
First was the pain. I wanted to stop the pain. And that your brain works just to save your life.
Did you think you were going to die?
I understood all the arteries were intact, so I was fine.
From when the injury happened, how long did it take until basically at the state that he's in?
9 surgeries. 21st of November is where I first stood in the prosthesis. I'll tell you on that I have any problems mentally.
Think that.
I ask myself that question. There in daily life, there's burdens that just simple things that more complicated.
Hypothetically, Russia significant advances, and they started getting to your own. Did you pick up a gun and
No, there's not even a question, of course. Even right now, if I could be a little bit more mobile, I would go right now. Those who don't want to support, there is a simple calculation. I mean, we've calculated that from each American, this has cost them $7 or something per month or per week. That's the calculation that was done to support us. So I think once a month, it's possible not to eat ice cream and extra ice cream. At least you will allow Ukrainian children to eat freely ice cream for the rest of their lives.